Hi, my name is Julia. You're just tuned into WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. And today's show, you've just tuned into Real Estate Real Talk. And as I mentioned, my name is Julia Spencer. I'm a local real estate investor, Airbnb host, and overall a real estate enthusiast. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the things that home buyers must do before they move into their new home. And we're going to get to that list here in just a few moments. We're going to play you guys some music from our stopover that's coming up this weekend. This first song is by Surfer Blood, and it's called Yes to Me. Surfer Blood, Say Yes to Me. Love that song. Been playing that all day long. And that's one of the bands that's actually going to come to our Stopover Music Festival coming up this weekend. So you'll see me at that concert for sure. And on today's show, I had a really hard time trying to figure out what we're going to do the show about because I had so many things I want to talk about. I recently closed on a house a couple days ago, 2 days ago actually, a tax sale foreclosure that I purchased about a year and a half ago. I want to say it's been a little bit longer than a year and a half, but finally, all that hard work came to an end, and I was able to sell it. And wanted to make the show about the closing statement, the settlement statement that all of us buyers and sellers have to examine and look at, of course, before we close on a house. And I was looking at my own settlement statement, and it never fails to amaze me how many line items are on that statement. And you've went through enough paperwork already to get to that point. Trying to examine a settlement statement, that's just another thing that none of us want to do. But there's also always a lot of things on there that I don't quite understand. So I'm going to pull up my settlement statement here in a little bit towards the end of the show, probably the last segment. And we're going to go through each item here little by little. And as you know, music and real estate are my two passions. So we're going to combine the two of them the best that I can. So I'll play some songs in between so it's not so dry. But before we get to the settlement statement, one of the things that you must do as a home buyer is you must basically do a couple of things before you even get to the closing point. And I'm going to just kind of talk about those 6 things that I've found anyways, and kind of like talk about my situation as they relate to those 6 points. So if you are in the progress of buying a home, you probably are familiar with these, but if it's first time home buyer, you might come up to these things and you're like, okay, what is this all about? I'm going to teach you a little bit about what each thing is. So a house checklist, basically it's a rundown of everything you need to do in the 11th hour before you get your hands on the keys of your house if you're a buyer. And you're approaching the finish line, right? So you're right about to get your house there and nothing can go wrong, right? No, a lot of things can go wrong at the very last minute. And I actually had a chat a couple days ago with one of my friends who's actually been here on the show too. His name is Chuck Fagan. He's a local loan officer. And we had a meeting about something that I wanted to do, but he was actually on the phone with one of his buyers, and they were about to deny his loan because there was some inconsistencies with some of the checking processes that loan officers have to do to get a person approved. And this is at the very last hour. The person, I believe, had already packed up their stuff in the van and were on the way to go to their house to move in, and they couldn't get approved for the loan. So this is very stressful. I can't imagine how stressful it is for the home buyer, probably very stressful for the originator as well, and anybody and everybody involved in the process, the real estate agent, the seller, everybody. So here are some of the things that you need to check up on before you get to that closing date. Closing date is kind of like celebration when everything is finally done. That's how I felt like 2 days ago anyways. But anyways, so here's a closing checklist. This is what outlines your action points in the few days leading up to the settlement. So it's best for you to probably keep this list handy to know you've done what you need to do in order to close on the deal. The first thing basically is to get all contingencies squared away. So what does that mean? That just means that most purchase agreements have contingencies. things that buyers must do before the transaction is official. And basically, some of the most common contingencies are a home inspection contingency. This basically gives the buyer the right to have the home professionally inspected. If something is wrong as the buyer, you can request for it to be fixed, or you can back out of the sale. And that's basically standard on every sales agreement. Usually, it's probably, I would say, maybe like 5 business days or 7 calendar days. Sometimes it's more days, but usually it's between 5 and 10. And it's rarely advisable to waive an inspection contingency. Even some of the buyers, even the buyer that just purchased the home that I sold a couple days ago, even though I don't think he physically ever inspected the property, they did have that home inspection contingency in there. And I was sweating those 5-7 days to see if they found anything they wanted me to do, even though it was a for sale as is type of contract. I was still worrying about them coming out and trying to find something and ask me to fix it. So although the average home inspection professionally done costs anywhere between $300 to $500, it's really just a drop in the bucket considering the costly home issues you might uncover. And that's true, especially if you get a very big mortgage to finance this home. If you have and by the way, I'm getting all this information here from a website called Realtor.com, and I'm giving like my 2 cents worth of this, because sometimes when you read these articles, you're like, is this really true? I don't know. But here, I'm your common sense person here. I'm going to analyze it for you and tell you whether this is actually true, what they're saying here. But in most times when I've paid for a home inspection, a professionally done home inspection, it was never $300. It was always $500 up to $700. So it was never that cheap. So this is a little bit outdated here. I don't know who does home inspections for $300, but if they're around there, let me know. I'll probably need to hire you, but I've never gotten away with paying less than $500. And a lot of times when you purchase a home with a mortgage and there's been already an appraisal done and the home was obviously advertised through the multiple listing service through a realtor or something, a lot of the defects and issues with the house have usually been already identified and remedied prior to the house going on market, because if it's been shown to other buyers, they would most likely point out things that are wrong with the house. And the real estate agent that's listing the property also has to kind of disclose everything that's wrong with the house. In fact, when you list a property on the MLS, there's actually a sheet in the back, and I don't even know what it's called, but it basically requests for the listing person, the listing owner, and the agent to disclose anything and everything that they know is wrong with the property. And it's pretty extensive. It goes into the electricity of the home, the plumbing, any kind of AC issues, heat issues, everything that you can possibly think of has to be disclosed on that sheet as far as the owner knows. And that is usually attached with the listing agreement. And that's actually part also of the contract. Any ensuing contract will have that list attached. That way, full transparency, buyer and seller all know what is wrong with the house prior to purchasing it. There's nothing hidden. And it's actually really bad for the seller to hide things that they are aware of and that are discovered later. But even so, even if that happens, a lot of times, for example, in my case, the homes that I sell, I buy them at a tax foreclosure sale, so I don't always know what's wrong with the house because I've never lived in it. A lot of times I've never looked at it until I actually purchased it and just hadn't had a lot of time to examine it and don't know the history of it. So I do the best that I can. I always write my contracts to sell the house as is. You can do that as well if you wish, but that's going to raise a couple of eyebrows with some of the buyers, because if a home is sold as is, that's kind of a translation for there's something wrong with it. Anyways, going back to home inspection, I'm getting off on a tangent here. Home inspection contingency is important, is normal for a normal real estate contract, and you are expected to pretty much drop $500 or so for a professional home inspector, who are, by the way, independent people. They do not work for a mortgage company, a seller, a buyer, or anybody else. And they are there to give you a very honest, unbiased opinion about the condition of the house and what it needs. And a lot of times they do a really great job. They have professional software where they enter all the information and they write up everything exactly what needs to be done to the house. And the inspectors also have a construction background, usually some sort of home building background, and are very experienced to analyze systems and checking. I've had inspectors that actually turned on air conditioning systems and heat systems and made sure that the house was cooling at an acceptable rate or heating at an acceptable rate and things like that, which is very important. Another thing that's very important as a contingency is the appraisal contingency. With this contingency, basically a third party hired by your mortgage lender usually evaluates the fair market value of the home. If the appraised value is less than the sales price, then the contingency enables you to back out of the deal without forfeiting your earnest money deposit. And that's also very important because, and this actually really recently happened to my hairdresser, my good hairdresser, Billy, who works there at Salon 2010 anyways. And he was trying to purchase a home, and they've already agreed on a price. They had a sales contract. They were ready to move in and sign the papers and move in, get that mortgage and everything. And the appraisal comes back, and the home appraised for, I believe it was something like $30,000 or $40,000 less than what it was, what the sales price was. And the mortgage company is like, well, the only option you have is as a buyer to come up with that difference, because we're not going to lend you more than it's worth, or else the seller has to reduce their price by that amount. We're going to have to meet at that point. What is appraised for? That's all we're going to be able to give you a mortgage for. And what ended up happening is, I think the sale failed. It didn't go through. And the seller didn't want to reduce the price. The buyer couldn't come up with the difference. And they basically quit that whole buying process and bought a house someplace else. Anyways, that's a really good thing, because you don't want to be already in the negative when you purchase a home. You don't want to have a loan on a home that's not even worth as much as what the loan is. So that's a really good appraisal contingency to have. And a lot of times with that contingency, that's going to be taken care of for you by the mortgage lender. They're going to be very diligent to not give people money for something that's not worth as much money as they're giving them, obviously. It makes total sense. And then there's a final contingency. It is the financing contingency. And that contingency basically gives you the right to back out of the deal if your mortgage approval falls through. It kind of rides on the last one. But if you have a specific time period as stated in the sales contract during which you have to obtain a loan that will cover the mortgage, if that falls through, then you can get out of the contract. So a lot of times there's something in there. Yeah, I'm going to buy this. Basically, the contract will say, yeah, I'm going to buy this house pending I can get financing. And if you can't get financing, you can't buy the house. So it's pretty obvious. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it's one of those legal things that are in those kinds of sales contracts, real estate sales contracts, that help a buyer to back out of the deal, basically, if they find themselves in a situation not to be able to get the mortgage. Anyways, let's move on. More things that homebuyers must do before they move in. The first one we just discussed were the contingencies. They all have to be squared away. The next thing that has to happen is you have to clear the title. So when you buy a home, you take title to the property and establish legal ownership. That's a process that's confirmed by local public land records. So as part of the closing process, your mortgage lender will require a title search and a title examination. They actually charge you separate for that, I just discovered. And you'll need to purchase title insurance to protect you from legal claims to the house. Now, let's talk about title insurance here for a little bit. I don't want to go too far into that rabbit hole here on my show because I only have till 1 o'clock, but I can probably talk quite a while about title insurance. Now, myself, as a real estate investor, I oftentimes buy properties very cheap at auctions. That means a lot of times there's something wrong with the property. It's in a bad location, it's in bad shape, or else obviously it's a forced sale. It's not a sale that the owner agreed to. Their property was basically auctioned off because they couldn't pay the taxes or whatever, or their HOA fees or condo fees or whatever, IRS fees. And they basically the property was basically taken from them, put to auction to satisfy the liens that are on the property. So that is considered a forced sale in a way. And a lot of title companies will not insure a title like that because obviously, since it's forced, it's not done by free will. There's no good warranty title, and we're not going to insure that kind of title, basically, is what title insurance companies say. So there's a lot of steps involved with my kind of investing to clear that title post-purchase. You have to borrow redemption rights, then you have to go back to the attorneys and do a quiet title. I'm actually in the process right now here in the city of Savannah to quiet titles on 2 properties that I purchased a little bit over a year ago. It's an expensive process. It takes a long time, and it's kind of cumbersome. It's just another legal step, though, that you have to do to make sure that you can get title insurance. Once a property can get title insurance, it's actually much easier to sell it, and it also enables for the buyer to get title insurance in the future. And why do you need title insurance? What if, I'm okay with the title being flawed. Yeah, you can sell a property that way as well. And you can buy a property that way as well. But you're going to have a hard time getting an underwriter to sign off on a loan like that if the title is not clear. And once you do your legal actions and complete all of those, then that's going to be a much better state of being there for you to get that mortgage. And basically what you'll have to do as a home buyer is you will need to somehow protect any legal claims to the house, protect you from those anyways. And the best way to do that, of course, is to get title insurance. And again, if you're dealing with a mortgage company, with a lender, they will be very clear about you having to do that. You can choose your own title insurance company. They're going to be doing their own title search, their own title examination. They have experts that do that. In fact, sometimes when I go to the courthouse here and other places where I've been, they have designated people that go to the courthouse and examine titles and property statements and property paperwork at the courthouse physically in their books. That's for the counties and places, cities and stuff that don't have that information digitized. A lot of places have that information digitized, and I can't remember exactly, but they have to go back at least 30 years, I believe, in order to kind of make sure that there's no flaws in the title, any kind of old liens or anything. Everything has to be cleared up on settlement date, basically. And which brings me to kind of like a weird question, because the property I just sold, I sold it as is. I sold it via quitclaim deed. I did not warranty the title. And for some reason, the buyer was able to get title insurance. Don't know how that happened. I'll keep you updated on that. I have no idea. I'm going to have to ask that question because that didn't make sense to me. But, I didn't question it. Title insurance wants to insure the place. That's fine. I think what it was, though, is the property I just sold was just such a low value that the risk to take on a title insurance on a low value property like the one I just sold isn't as high, and maybe the buyer just paid extra money to the title insurance company to insure that, and maybe they thought it was a risk worth taking in any case. So, as the home buyer, you are entitled to choose the title company, as I mentioned. You can get recommendations from your real estate agent, mortgage lender, and friends. Just make sure that you check out the license and reputation of each company online. And thank you so much for tuned in to Real Estate Real Talk here. We are almost at the half point of our show here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of a break song, catch my breath here, and we're going to continue talking about some of the things that you have to do in order to move into your home prior to settlement of your home. And I'll be right back after this. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. That was Camp Howard. Name of that song is I Will. One of the bands playing at the Stopover this weekend. I will be at that concert. In case you're a music fan, that's where most of us hosts will be this weekend. Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, Savannah Stopover Music Festival. I think one of the best things here in Savannah. Anyways, thanks for having tuned in. I got a couple more announcements, and we're going to continue talking about some of the things you need to do as a home buyer before you go to your closing. And see if I can get it going. There it goes. And welcome back. You've just tuned into Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. Thanks for having tuned in. And if you're just tuning in and you haven't caught that first part of the show, I do record my shows. I have a brain moment here. I do record my shows and I put them online. So if you want to listen to the whole show later on, you can go to wreu.org and go under archives Wednesdays at noon. My archive shows are there. You can listen to all of them there. It takes me a little bit to get them up there, so just bear with me. There's a whole bunch of old ones too that you can listen to. And also, I do put my shows on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It's pretty active. Almost 7,000 subscribers. Yay! Thank you, everybody. And that's just my name, Julia M. Spencer. The videos are free to listen to and watch. There's a whole bunch more there, too. So you can check them out if you want to get educated about real estate investing, and being a landlord, and anything and everything really related to real estate, which is my big passion. And on today's show, we're talking about some of the things that you need to do as a home buyer, as a brand new home buyer, before you can close on your home and get the keys and walk in and start settling and moving in and living happily ever after, right? So we just talked about some of the contingencies that you need to have squared away and cleared up before you close. But let's talk, and we talked about clearing the title. Let's talk next about getting a final mortgage approval. So before you can go to the closing table, your home loan actually must go through the underwriting process. Underwriters are like real estate detectives. It's basically their job to make sure you have represented yourself and your finances truthfully, and that you haven't made any false or misleading claims on your loan application. And they do this very diligently. They'll check your credit report. They actually check it more than once. If the whole closing process takes 30 days, they'll do it in the beginning, and they'll do it at the end again to make sure nothing's changed, Make sure you didn't borrow a bunch of money and say, hey, look, I got all this money to buy the house, and then you paid it back and it's gone. They'll check your bank statements. They'll check your paperwork on your employment, make sure that you actually work there. They'll actually call your work and make sure that you do have a job there in case that's what you stated. They'll check your tax records. I mean, they really are detectives. It's almost kind of a little bit annoying every time I had to go through this process, but it's also nerve-wracking. And it does not only just happen when you purchase a home, it also happens when you refinance a home. So the whole, I call it the dog and poodle show there, or whatever you call it. You got to go through that each time you get a new mortgage. The underwriter, who is typically employed by your mortgage lender, will check your credit score. Like I said, review your home appraisal, ensure your financial portfolio has remained the same since you were pre-approved. And underwriting usually happens shortly before closing. So you don't want to do anything while you're in contract that's going to hurt your credit score, like I mentioned. You don't want to buy a car or something while you're trying to buy a house at the same time. That or a boat or anything, any large purchases like that have to be financed. You got to be careful about that. Now, in the past, I have worked with loan officers who were their own underwriters. So this is something, it happened to me, I think maybe once or twice, which was really cool. And when that happens, when they're the same person or in the same office, that's actually really beneficial, because what happens, there's a lot of talking going on between the originator, the actual loan officer, and the underwriter. But when they're actually in the same office and they're face to face, or they work with each other all the time, it kind of speeds up the process for you as a buyer. And of course, as a buyer, you are the one that chooses your mortgage company and your lender, so you can choose who's going to be the person that works for you. And a lot of times, too, I've found that, don't quote me on that, but certain real estate agents actually work with certain lenders best. So there have been instances, known in any case, where I bought a house and I went through a real estate agent and they recommended a certain loan officer to me. And because they've been working and had a working relationship with each other for many, many other clients who've purchased homes, they seem to be clicking with each other much faster, and they seem to be knowing what the other person is doing, kind of working with each other, which helps you as a buyer. But again, I will not recommend that to you here officially on the air. Of course, you can always choose the lender that you want. You can even go online and get a mortgage online through one of the online services. But then you might have delays with communication and things like that. So I've always found it beneficial when the actual mortgage officer and real estate agent are local people, local to the market where I'm purchasing. And also that they've worked together before is always beneficial. But anyways, you got to have that final mortgage approval, and the faster you can get that done as a buyer, of course, is the most beneficial to you. Let's get to step number 4 of what you need to do as a buyer. You need to review your closing disclosure. Oh my gosh. So here we're talking about a settlement statement. This is what I mentioned at the beginning of the show. If you're getting a loan, one of the best ways to prepare is through thoroughly reviewing your closing disclosure. It's also known as the HUD-1 settlement statement. This official document outlines your exact mortgage payments, the loan's terms, the interest rate and duration, and additional fees you'll pay, called closing costs, which total anywhere from 2 to 7% of your home's price. You want to compare your closing disclosure to the loan estimate your lender gave you at the outset. If you spot any discrepancies, ask your lender to explain them. And I can't tell you how often I have found discrepancies. And it's almost like a daily occurrence. So even this one statement that I just signed 2 days ago, I found issues with it. And in this particular case, there was a wrong number that I was charged for some code compliance issues here with the city of Savannah. City had to come out and clear my lot because I didn't have access rights to it at the time, and they had to cut the weed and neighbors were complaining. They charged me a certain fee. When I talked to the code compliance officer, they said, oh, we're going to waive half of that. But that wasn't reflected in the statement, in the settlement statement. So I had to go talk to the attorney to get that adjusted. Of course, the attorney wasn't going to take my word for it, so they had to call the code compliance office. They were closed for training that day, so we had to wait another couple days. So in any case, there's always something wrong with that closing disclosure. So it's your best bet as a buyer, even if you don't do it very often, to really, really examine that closing disclosure. And unfortunately, on today's show, I'm not going to be able to get through all the items in there, but some of the basic things that are on there are the commissions that you pay for your real estate agents, the taxes, the insurance, any kind of title insurance examination, and the title search itself, any kind of courier fees, any kind of document stamps that you have to pay to the county and city to transfer the title. There's all kinds of things on there. Don't let yourself get confused by what I just said in the last couple of seconds here. We're going to go through that in very much bigger detail in one of my future shows here. But you do definitely need to review that closing disclosure. So just put that on your to-do list there as a home buyer to learn what a closing disclosure actually looks like. And what it'll look like actually is there's basically 2 columns. There's a seller's column and a buyer's column, and it outlines exactly on each line item what each person is responsible for. It adds them at the bottom, and that's how they come up with a final price that the seller gets and you have to pay, or your mortgage company has to pay on your behalf, and how much money you may have to bring into the closing table for, a down payment or to pay for some of the closing costs. And we're getting close here to our 6 points. That was point number 4, review your closing disclosure. Our show here today is about some of the things that home buyers must do before they move into their new home. And I'm going to be catching my breath again, and I'm going to play you guys another song from the Savannah Stopover here. And we'll be right back with the last 2 points. And this one is by Pink Clouds, and it's called Soul in My Body. Pink Clouds, Soul in My Body, one of the bands from the Stopover that's going to be playing right here in Savannah this weekend. So kind of sharing my favorite playlist here. Anyways, thanks for having tuned into Real Estate Real Talk. My name is Julia M. Spencer. You're listening to WRULP. Got another, a little bit less than 15 minutes here, 14 minutes left. So I'm going to briefly talk about the last two items here on my list, some of the things that you have to do in case you want to buy a home, and at the 11th hour you might be asked to do. So just prepare yourself, because it's always a stressful time. Take some time to buy a home. It takes time anyways. The fifth thing, we're at number 5 here, do a final walkthrough. So most sales contracts allow buyers to do a walkthrough of the home within 24 hours before closing. During this stage, you're making sure the previous owner has vacated, unless you're allowed a rent-back arrangement in which they can stick around for a period of time before moving. You're also double-checking that the home is in the condition agreed upon in the contract. If your home inspection revealed problems that the sellers had agreed to fix, you want to make sure those repairs were made. This is important mostly if you're taking up a really large mortgage, a big loan to buy that home. So it's very important that you verify that the things that were identified in the inspection and the buyer has agreed to, the seller, has agreed to fix, were actually remedied. And a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times it happened where I've inspected the things that they said they were going to fix and they weren't fixed, or they were half fixed, or, they were kind of like not really done according to how we agreed. And of course, then we have to push back the closing date and have them remedy those. And another thing that's stated here is saying that making sure that the previous owner has vacated, unless you've allowed a rent-back arrangement. That really rarely ever happens. By the time it gets to the closing point, the seller will have vacated. It's very unusual for the seller to stick around renting their own home because the closing date has moved, unless something, of course, happened to cause that closing date to move to the right a little bit. That usually rarely happens. But if a buyer, of course, wants to move into a home before closing, that actually happens quite frequently. And I've had that happen several times where the home was already vacant when it was listed. So when you look at most homes to buy them, they're usually vacated. They're not always occupied. And it's an empty house already, so might as well move in early if the seller agrees to it. And then you have some sort of rent thing going up until the date of closing, where if you move in 2 weeks earlier, you just pay the seller 2 weeks of rent of some agreed upon amount. And a lot of times, since the seller wants to sell the home, a lot of times you can just move in 2 weeks early and not pay any rent. And then there's some sort of agreement that if the closing doesn't happen on the date specified in the contract, that the rent is then due. So it's free. If you do everything you said that you're supposed to do as a buyer, it costs you money if you don't close on time. So I've had that happen several times. So not very likely that the seller sticks around past closing time, but very likely that the buyer actually moves in early. And you can definitely ask for that as the buyer in the contract if you need to have a place to move in before closing. And it also, it kind of like, it's a little bit of a thing of goodwill in terms of if you, as the buyer, request you want to move in already, that kind of tells the seller that you're really serious. You're not going to back out at the last moment. Your stuff is already there. You've already moved in. You're going to close. Even if it goes to the right a little bit, the settlement date, you're going to close. So that's a good thing for the seller and for the buyer too. So it's a good thing. Anyways, last but not least, bring the necessary documentation to closing. Make sure you have the following items when you head to the closing table. First, a proof of homeowner's insurance. Yeah, you don't really need to bring that. That's something that usually everybody involved in the game has already checked up on that you have prior to the closing. Your real estate agent, your attorney, and of course your attorney, because it's going to be somehow reflected already in the settlement statement there. Somebody has to pay for that, obviously. And the seller will know that as well. You as the buyer, of course, you'll know that because you've hired them. A copy of your contract with the seller. Again, you don't really need to bring that because the attorney that's closing the deal is actually going to be having that contract already. Your home inspection reports. Not sure why you need to bring those to the closing table, but I guess I'm kind of picking apart this little article on Realtor.com, and it says any paperwork the bank required to approve your loan. Yeah, I don't know. You don't really need to bring any of this to the closing table. Most of this is handled by the attorneys who are doing the closing. And let me just get to that here in a moment about the closing, who actually does the closing. And the last thing they have here on the list is a government-issued photo ID. And no to newlyweds who just changed their name. The ID needs to match the name that will appear on the property's title and mortgage. Yay to you if you just got married and you buy a home before changing your ID. It's good for you. Not to rush anything. Anyways, that is the one thing that you actually really do need to bring. You do need to bring an ID. I had to bring an ID 2 days ago when I closed on the home that I sold. The same was required from the buyer, I'm sure. And plan to sign a ton of paperwork, basically. An attorney or settlement agent will guide you through the process. They'll do it very quickly because I do a lot of these closings and they might rush you through it. So take your time. And when you're done, collect the keys and you're finally home free. And a lot of times people don't collect keys, actually. Again, sometimes these articles are just not right. You know, if you're a buyer and you have to get keys from the seller, as a buyer, I usually change the locks anyways, so no need to give me the key other than just to open the house the first time so I can change the lock. But in any case, that's, a statement here made by this article. Now, as the seller, you actually don't have to sign a lot of paperwork. As the buyer, you will, especially if you have a mortgage. So all kinds of things you have to sign off, like some paperwork stating that if something's wrong in a settlement, that you agree in good faith to change it sometime in the future or pretty soon afterwards. And there's all kinds of things that attorneys make you sign and the mortgage company makes you sign, and you'll be signing for quite a while. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you have to sign your name like 50 times, and it's a big stack of paperwork that you'll get. So it's kind of fun. You get to practice doing your signature in any case. But I wanted to really briefly, before I get off the air here, because we have another 7 minutes here, just tell you really quickly that not in every state does an attorney do the closing. And I've realized that when I started buying properties in other states, and I always thought that, okay, in the state of Georgia, an attorney does the closing, but that's not actually the case. There's 3 different kinds of ways a closing is done. It's done through an attorney in some states, sometimes through an escrow account, and sometimes, or representative, and sometimes through a title insurance representative. So right here on the East Coast, here in Georgia, of course, it's an attorney. Start moving to Texas and westward. Title companies usually do the closing, and everything out on the West Coast, including Alaska, is all done by escrow companies. Title companies in the middle. So East Coast, attorneys. Middle of the country is title companies, and everything in the West is escrow. So that's just a little FYI. I didn't know that until I started researching that. It's kind of interesting to me. But it actually is a good thing because I think that maybe the other 2 agents are a little bit cheaper than attorneys. I don't know. If you have any comments on that, feel free to send them to me. My email address is realestate@juliamspencer.com. Tell me what you think about that and what your experience has been in other states other than Georgia. Of course, if you're listening to the show on my YouTube channel, you can always leave comments at the bottom too if you'd like. And I like to hear what you have to say, so stay in touch and let me know. And that concludes my show here for today, Real Estate Real Talk. Up next on the station, we have Ben, who is going to enlighten you with some amazing African music. Always love his show, so stay on. And I'm going to be signing off with a couple more songs that are performed or by artists that are going to be playing here at the Stopover Music Festival coming up this weekend, starting Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. This next one is by a band called Bad Habits, I believe. Let me see. What is it called? Bad Hats. There you go. And it's called Shame. And then the last one will be by Little Stranger, Me and You. And I hope you guys have a great Wednesday afternoon. Check out the other programs here on the show on WRUU. Also, we always appreciate your donations. We're all volunteers at the station. And we look forward to hear from you and see you around town. Have a great Wednesday, everybody.
For your free guide to real estate investing, visit juliamspencer.com.